The city's tallest skyscraper gleamed under the afternoon sun, its glass walls reflecting the bustling streets below. At the very top, in a penthouse that overlooked the entire metropolis, lived one of the wealthiest men in the world, a billionaire known for his ruthless business deals and cold demeanor. But behind the polished doors of his luxurious home, he carried a pain no amount of money could fix. His only son, a bright-eyed boy of 12, was sick. The doctors had tried everything: experimental treatments, specialists from across the globe, even cutting-edge technology, but nothing worked. The boy's condition was rare, and time was running out. One evening, as the billionaire sat by his son's bedside, the boy mustered a weak smile. "Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "There's one thing I want before I can't anymore." The billionaire leaned closer, his heart pounding. He had spent his life acquiring fortunes, but at that moment, he would have given it all away for his son's happiness. "Anything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tell me, and it's yours." The boy hesitated, then spoke softly. "I want to meet my real brother." The billionaire froze. His mind raced. He had no other children, at least, none that he knew of. But the boy's words struck a chord deep within him, unlocking a memory he had buried long ago. Years before his empire, before his wealth, he had been a different man, young, reckless, and in love. There had been a woman, a relationship that ended abruptly when he chose ambition over everything else. Had there been a child? His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. With a single call, he set his team of investigators on a mission, to find out if he had another son. Days passed in a blur of anxiety. Then, the call came. The investigator's voice was steady but cautious. "Sir, we found him." The billionaire's breath caught in his throat. "Where?" "A small town, about 6 hours from here. He's 19 now. Works at a local garage." The billionaire's mind spun. A son he never knew existed, living a life so different from the luxury his younger boy had known. What would he say to him? How would he explain? But none of that mattered now. His sick son's wish was all that did. Without hesitation, he ordered his driver to prepare the car. He would go himself, no assistants, no lawyers, just a father on a mission to fulfill his child's last wish. As the sleek black car pulled away from the skyscraper, the billionaire stared out the window, his heart heavy with regret, hope, and fear. Little did he know, this journey would change everything, not just for his dying son, but for himself, and for the young man he was about to meet. The car rolled into the small town just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The streets were quiet, lined with old brick buildings and flickering streetlights. It was a world away from the gleaming towers and fast-paced life the billionaire knew. His driver slowed down near a rundown garage at the end of the main road. The sign above it was faded, barely readable: Mike's Auto Repair. The billionaire took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the door handle. This was it. Inside the garage, a young man in oil-stained overalls was bent over a car engine, his hands working quickly despite the dim light. He didn't notice the expensive car pulling up outside, nor the well-dressed stranger stepping out. The billionaire hesitated for a moment, watching him. This was his son. A boy? No, a man he had never known existed. What would he even say? "Hello, I'm your father." That sounded like something from a bad movie. Before he could overthink it, he walked forward. The sound of his polished shoes against the concrete made the young man glance up. For a second, neither of them spoke. The young man wiped his hands on a rag, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Can I help you?" The billionaire cleared his throat. I think we need to talk." The young man frowned. "About what?" "You need your car fixed." "No. It's about family." A flicker of confusion crossed the young man's face, then something darker: suspicion. "Look, if you're selling something, I'm not interested. The billionaire took a step closer. I'm not selling anything. I just found out, recently, that you might be my son. Silence. The young man stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then, suddenly, he let out a sharp laugh. Yeah, right. Good joke. Who put you up to this? Jake from the diner? The billionaire didn't smile. I'm serious. The young man's grin faded. He studied the billionaire's face, his own slowly hardening. Prove it. The billionaire reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old photograph, one the investigators had dug up. It showed a much younger version of himself standing beside a woman, her arms wrapped around his waist. The young man's mother. The moment the young man saw the photo, his breath hitched. He snatched it, staring at it like it was a ghost. Where did you get this? I knew her. A long time ago, the billionaire said quietly. I didn't know about you. If I had. The young man's jaw clenched. If you had, what? You would have stuck around? Given us money? Made everything better? His voice was bitter, edged with years of unspoken anger. The billionaire didn't have an answer. He had spent his life building an empire, ignoring everything else. Now, standing in this dingy garage, he felt the weight of that choice for the first time. I didn't come here to make excuses, he finally said. I came because, my other son is sick. Very sick. And before, his voice cracked. Before it's too late, he wants to meet you. The young man's anger faltered. He looked down at the photo again, then back at the billionaire. You have another son? The billionaire nodded. He's 12. He doesn't have much time left. The young man was silent for a long moment. Then, with a slow exhale, he tossed the rag aside. I need to close up the shop. The billionaire's heart pounded. Does that mean, you'll come? The young man didn't answer right away. He walked over to the garage door and pulled it down, locking it. When he turned back, his expression was guarded but no longer hostile. Let's go meet my brother. The drive back to the city was tense. The billionaire sat stiffly in the back seat of the car, his eyes fixed on the passing scenery. Beside him, his oldest son, his son, kept his arms crossed, staring out the window in silence. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. The billionaire wanted to say something, anything, to break the ice. But what could he say? Sorry I wasn't there for you. That wouldn't erase 19 years of absence. Finally, the young man spoke without looking at him. What's his name? The billionaire blinked. Who? Your other son. My brother. The billionaire swallowed hard. We call him Junior. A small, almost invisible smirk tugged at the young man's lips. Original. The billionaire let out a quiet breath, relieved at the hint of humor. His mother picked it. The young man nodded slowly. And his mom? She's still around? The billionaire's chest tightened. No. She passed away a few years ago. Silence again. The young man shifted in his seat, his expression unreadable. The billionaire hesitated, then asked, What about your mother? Is she? The young man's jaw tightened. Gone. 5 years back. Cancer. The billionaire felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He had loved that woman once, a lifetime ago. And now she was gone, without him ever knowing she'd had his child. Without him ever saying goodbye. I'm sorry, he said quietly. The young man just shrugged, but his fingers dug into his arms where they were folded. The rest of the ride passed in silence. When the car finally pulled up to the penthouse, the young man let out a low whistle. You weren't kidding about the rich part. The billionaire didn't respond. His heart was pounding as they stepped into the elevator, rising higher and higher. What if Junior doesn't like him? What if this makes things worse? The doors opened directly into the penthouse. A nurse stood near the living room, speaking softly to someone on the couch. Then, a small, weak voice called out, "Dad?" Junior was wrapped in a thick blanket, his face pale but his eyes bright with curiosity as he looked past his father, to the stranger standing beside him. The billionaire stepped forward, forcing a smile. "Hey, buddy. I found him." Junior's breath hitched. His wide eyes locked onto the young man. "You're really my brother?" The young man hesitated. Then, slowly, he stepped closer and crouched down in front of the couch so they were eye level. "Yeah. I guess I am." Junior's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. Without warning, he threw his thin arms around the young man's neck, hugging him tightly. The young man froze for a second, then, awkwardly, he hugged him back. The billionaire watched, his throat burning. His youngest, so full of love despite his pain. His oldest, so guarded but softening in just seconds. And for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd buried long ago, hope. That night, after Junior had fallen asleep, begging his brother to stay close, the billionaire found the young man standing on the penthouse balcony, staring at the city lights. "You should get some rest," the billionaire said. "There's a guest room." "I'm not staying." The words were sharp. The billionaire flinched. "What?" The young man turned, his face hard again. "Look, I came because of the kid. He's great. But this?" He gestured between them. "This isn't some happy family reunion. You don't get to disappear for 20 years and then show up expecting everything to be okay." The billionaire's shoulders slumped. "I know. I'm not expecting that. But Junior deserves better," the young man snapped. "He deserves a dad who was there. Just like I did." The words hung in the air like a knife. The billionaire had no defense. No excuses. Because the young man was right. Before he could respond, the young man pushed past him. "I'll come back tomorrow. For him. Not for you." And just like that, he was gone. The billionaire stood alone on the balcony, the weight of his failures crushing him. But as he looked back at his sleeping son, the one who still believed in him, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't give up. Not this time. The next morning, the billionaire woke to the sound of hushed voices in the living room. He rubbed his tired eyes and walked out to find Junior sitting up on the couch, wrapped in his favorite blue blanket, chatting excitedly. Across from him, slouched in an armchair, was his oldest son, back already, just as he'd promised. The young man looked up as the billionaire entered, his expression unreadable. But Junior beamed. "Dad." He came back. The billionaire's chest tightened. "I see that." The young man cleared his throat. "Kid wouldn't stop asking when I'd get here. Woke up at 6 a.m. apparently." Junior giggled, though it turned into a weak cough. "I wanted to show you my Lego collection before the nurse comes." The young man raised an eyebrow. "Legos, huh? You build cars? Race cars? And spaceships? Wanna see?" Before the young man could answer, Junior was already struggling to get up. Instinctively, both the billionaire and his oldest son moved to help, their hands brushing awkwardly as they reached for him at the same time. A beat of silence. Then the young man pulled back, letting the billionaire steady Junior instead. "Careful, buddy," the billionaire murmured, helping his son to his feet. Junior didn't seem to notice the tension. He grabbed his brother's hand with surprising strength. "Come on. They're in my room." The young man allowed himself to be dragged away, throwing one last glance at the billionaire over his shoulder, a look that said, "This isn't for you." Later that afternoon, while Junior napped, the billionaire found the young man in the kitchen, eating a sandwich like he hadn't had a meal in days. "You're welcome to anything here," the billionaire said quietly. The young man shrugged. "Just grabbing a bite before I head out." "You don't have to leave." "Yeah. I do." He took another bite, then added, "But I'll be back tomorrow." The billionaire hesitated. "Why?" The young man paused mid-chew. "What? Why do you keep coming back? You made it clear you're not here for me. So why?" For a long moment, the young man just stared at his plate. Then, in a voice so quiet the billionaire almost missed it, "Because he reminds me of her." The billionaire froze. "Your mother?" A nod. "The way he laughs. The stupid jokes. Even the way he tilts his head when he's confused." The young man swallowed hard. "I didn't think I'd ever see that again." The billionaire's throat burned. He wanted to say so much, to apologize, to explain, but all that came out was, "She would have loved him." The young man's eyes flicked up, sharp. "Yeah. She would have loved both of us." The words hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then the young man pushed his plate away and stood. "Tell Junior I'll bring him something cool tomorrow." And just like that, he was gone again. 3 days passed like this. The young man would arrive in the morning, spend hours with Junior, building Legos, watching cartoons, listening to the boys' endless questions, then leave before dinner, always avoiding any real conversation with the billionaire. But on the 4th day, everything changed. The billionaire was in his home office when the nurse burst in, her face pale. "Sir, it's Junior. Something's wrong." His blood turned to ice. He sprinted to his son's room, where Junior was gasping for breath, his small body trembling. The private doctor was already there, barking orders to the nurse. "Dad," Junior choked out, his fingers clutching at the sheets. "I'm here, buddy, I'm here." The billionaire grabbed his son's hand, his own shaking. Then, from behind him, a voice, "What's happening?" The young man stood in the doorway, a small toy car clutched in his hand, the "something cool" he'd promised to bring. His eyes locked onto Junior, and his face went white. The doctor didn't look up. "We need to get him to the hospital. Now." The next minutes were a blur. The medical team rushed Junior to the private elevator, the billionaire and young man trailing helplessly behind. As the elevator descended, the young man turned to the billionaire, his voice trembling with rage and fear, "Fix this. You're supposed to be able to fix everything." The billionaire could only stare at his son, both his sons, and pray to a God he'd never believed in that he wouldn't lose them both today. The hospital hallway stretched endlessly, its fluorescent lights humming like a swarm of bees. The billionaire paced outside the ICU, his expensive shoes scuffing against the sterile floor. Every second felt like an hour. Every beep from the machines inside sent his heart racing. His oldest son sat slumped in a plastic chair nearby, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. The toy car he'd brought for Junior, a vintage model he'd spent half his paycheck on, rolled slowly between his fingers. "They said it would take an hour," the young man muttered. "It's been 3. The billionaire didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed up the moment he'd seen the doctors rush Junior through those double doors. A nurse approached, her scrubs rustling. "Mr. Reynolds? The lead specialist wants to speak with you." The billionaire moved like a man in a dream. His oldest son stood too, following silently. Inside a small consultation room, a gray-haired doctor with tired eyes waited. "We've stabilized him," he said without preamble. The billionaire nearly collapsed with relief. "But," the doctor continued, "his organs are weakening faster than we anticipated. The treatments aren't working anymore." The young man made a choked sound. "What does that mean?" "It means," the doctor said gently, "without something drastic, he has weeks. Maybe less." The billionaire's vision swam. His hands found the edge of the table, gripping until his knuckles turned white. There has to be another option. The doctor hesitated. There is one experimental procedure. A bone marrow transplant from a close genetic match could buy him time. Maybe even put him into remission. The billionaire's head snapped up. Do it. Whatever it costs. That's the problem, the doctor interrupted. We tested you already. You're not a match. Silence. Then. What about me? Both men turned. The young man stood straighter now, his jaw set. Test me. The billionaire's breath caught. In all the chaos, he hadn't even considered. The doctor nodded slowly. A sibling would be our best chance. We can run the tests immediately. As the young man rolled up his sleeve for the blood draw, he locked eyes with the billionaire. Neither spoke, but the message was clear: this isn't for you. This is for him. The waiting was torture. They put the young man in a hospital room down the hall, just for observation, the nurses said, while the lab worked frantically. The billionaire stood between both rooms, torn in two directions. Finally, near midnight, the doctor returned. The billionaire surged to his feet. Well? The doctor's face gave nothing away. Then, slowly, he smiled. It's a near-perfect match. One of the best I've seen. The billionaire nearly sobbed with relief. But the young man, still sitting on the hospital bed, just nodded quietly. When do we start? The next morning, as preparations began, Junior woke up groggy but alert. When they told him the news, that his big brother was going to help make him better, his tired face lit up like fireworks. Really? He whispered, reaching for his brother's hand. The young man swallowed hard. Yeah, kid. Really? Junior's smile faded slightly. Does it hurt? A little, the young man admitted. But I've had worse. The billionaire, standing near the door, felt something crack in his chest. How many times had his oldest son been hurt, sick, or scared, with no one there to care for him? Junior squeezed his brother's fingers. Will you stay with me? After? The young man glanced at the billionaire, just for a second, before answering. Yeah. I'll stay. And in that moment, the billionaire realized something terrifying. He might just get everything he'd ever wanted. And lose it all at the same time. The hospital room was too quiet. The billionaire sat between his two sons, watching the steady drip of the four delivering his oldest son's bone marrow to his youngest. The machines hummed softly, the only sound in the sterile space. Junior slept fitfully, his small face pale against the white pillows. Across from him, the young man dozed in a recliner, his arms still bandaged from the extraction procedure. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. The billionaire hadn't slept in 36 hours. A soft knock at the door. The head nurse entered, checking Junior's vitals. The transplant is taking well, she whispered. No rejection signs yet. The billionaire nodded numbly. He should have felt relieved. Instead, a new fear gnawed at him. What if this was just another temporary fix? What if he'd asked too much of the son he'd just found? As if sensing his thoughts, the young man stirred, blinking awake. His gaze immediately went to Junior before flickering to the billionaire. He okay? The billionaire's throat tightened. So far. The young man nodded, wincing as he shifted in the chair. The doctors had warned the extraction would leave him sore for days. You should be in a proper bed, the billionaire said quietly. The young man snorted. And missed the kid's dramatic wake-up? No way. Despite everything, the billionaire felt the ghost of a smile. Then he noticed the way his oldest son was subtly favoring his left side. Does it hurt more than you're letting on? A pause. Then a shrug. I've had worse. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. The billionaire opened his mouth, to apologize, to explain, he wasn't sure, when Junior suddenly stirred. "Brother?" Junior's voice was hoarse with sleep. The young man was at his side in an instant. "Right here, champ." Junior's small hand found his brother's. "Did it work?" "Working right now," the young man said, nodding to the four. "You're getting the good stuff." Junior managed a weak smile before his eyes fluttered closed again. The young man stayed standing there, watching the slow rise and fall of his brother's chest. The billionaire rose to stand beside him. For a long moment, they just watched Junior together. Then the young man spoke, so softly the billionaire almost missed it. She would have loved him. The billionaire didn't need to ask who he meant. She would have been an amazing grandmother. The young man's jaw worked. She was an amazing mother. The words weren't accusatory, just factual. And that somehow made them cut deeper. The billionaire stared at his oldest son's profile, the stubborn set of his jaw so like his own, the faint scar above his eyebrow from some childhood accident he'd never been there to kiss better. "I should have looked for you," he whispered. The young man didn't look at him. "Yeah. You should have." Silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but no longer hostile. Then, "Dad?" Junior was awake again, his eyes clearer this time. Both men turned toward him instantly. "Yeah, buddy?" the billionaire asked. Junior looked between them, a small frown forming. "You two aren't fighting anymore?" The billionaire froze. The young man let out a surprised huff of laughter. "Were we fighting?" the young man asked, raising an eyebrow. Junior gave him a look that was far too wise for a 12-year-old. "You were doing that thing where you don't yell but your voice gets all tight." The young man blinked, then shook his head. "Kid's too smart for his own good." The billionaire felt something warm unfold in his chest despite everything. He gets that from his brother. For the first time since they'd met, the young man met his eyes without bitterness. Just for a second. Then he ruffled Junior's hair. "All right, detective, what do you want to watch? I'm not sitting through Frozen again." As Junior giggled and demanded some superhero movie, the billionaire stepped back, watching his sons, his family, with an ache that had nothing to do with sorrow. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe some wounds could still heal. Then the monitor beside Junior's bed let out a sharp, sudden beep. All three of them froze. Then the machine screamed. The heart monitor's shrill alarm tore through the room like a siren. Before the billionaire could react, nurses rushed in, their calm professionalism giving way to urgent movements. One checked Junior's pulse while another adjusted his oxygen mask. The lead doctor pushed past them, his face grim. "Crash cart, now." The young man stumbled back as medical personnel swarmed the bed, blocking his view of Junior. "What's happening?" His voice cracked with panic. The billionaire stood frozen, his mind screaming but his body refusing to move. This wasn't supposed to happen. The transplant was supposed to help. A nurse gripped his arm, pulling him toward the door. "Sir, we need you to wait outside." "No," the young man lurched forward, but another nurse stopped him. "Please," she said firmly. "We need room to work." The billionaire finally found his voice. "Save him." It wasn't a request. It was a demand from a man used to getting his way. The door swung shut in their faces. The hallway was too bright, too quiet compared to the chaos inside. The young man paced like a caged animal, running both hands through his hair. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." The billionaire reached for him instinctively, then let his hand drop. "They'll fix it." He didn't know if he believed it. The young man whirled on him. "You said this would work. You promised." His eyes were wild, his breath coming too fast. "I never promised." You didn't have to. The young man's voice broke. You just assumed your money could fix everything. Just like you assumed you could waltz back into my life after 20 years, Anne. A sob cut him off. He pressed his fists to his eyes, his whole body shaking. The billionaire didn't think. He pulled his son into his arms. For a second, the young man stiffened. Then he collapsed against him, his anger giving way to sheer terror. He can't die, he choked out. Not him too. The billionaire held him tighter, feeling his own tears fall. I know. In that moment, titles and wealth meant nothing. They were just two broken men clinging to each other in the storm. An eternity later, the door opened. The doctor emerged, his scrubs damp with sweat. The billionaire and young man sprang apart, bracing for the worst. Then the doctor smiled. He's stable. The young man nearly fell to his knees. The billionaire gripped the wall for support. It was a temporary reaction to the transplant, the doctor explained. His body was fighting the new cells, but we've managed it. Honestly? He shook his head in wonder. That was the closest match I've ever seen. Your son saved his life. The young man made a sound between a laugh and a sob. The doctor's expression turned serious. There's something else. When we ran the full genetic workup for the transplant. He hesitated. We found something unusual in both boys' DNA. The billionaire's blood ran cold. What? It's not harmful, the doctor assured quickly. Just unexpected. There are markers that suggest. Doc. A nurse called from the doorway. He's asking for them. The doctor nodded. You can see him now. We'll talk more later. Junior looked tiny in the hospital bed, surrounded by wires and machines. But his eyes lit up when they entered. You came back, he whispered. The young man rushed to his side, carefully taking his hand. Told you I would, didn't I? Junior smiled weakly, then looked at the billionaire. Dad? You're crying. The billionaire wiped his face, surprised to find it wet. Just happy you're okay, buddy. Junior studied them both. You guys hugged, didn't you? The young man groaned. This kid notices everything. Junior's smile faded as he struggled to stay awake. Brother, thank you. The young man squeezed his hand. Anytime, champ. As Junior drifted off, the billionaire met his oldest son's eyes over the hospital bed. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a beginning. The doctor's words echoed in the billionaire's mind. Something unusual in both boys' DNA. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 3 days after the crisis, the hospital room was finally quiet. Junior slept peacefully, his breathing steady for the first time in months. The machines that had once screamed alarms now hummed softly, their readings normal. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting warm stripes across the blanket. The billionaire sat on one side of the bed, his oldest son on the other. They'd taken turns staying through the night, neither willing to leave until they were certain Junior was out of danger. The doctor entered with a clipboard, his expression unreadable. Gentlemen, we need to talk. The billionaire tensed. Is something wrong? Not wrong. Just unexpected. The doctor set down the clipboard. The genetic markers we found? They're extremely rare. The kind that usually only appear in. He hesitated. In identical twins. The young man frowned. That's impossible. We're 7 years apart. The doctor nodded. Which means there's only one explanation. You two share the same mother, but different fathers who were identical twins themselves. The billionaire's breath caught. A memory surfaced, his father mentioning an estranged twin brother decades ago. A brother who disappeared before the billionaire was born. My uncle, he whispered. The young man looked between them, realization dawning. So my grandfather was my father's twin, the billionaire finished. Which means genetically, you and I are as close as father and son can be without actually being father and son, the doctor confirmed. That's why the transplant worked so perfectly. Silence filled the room as the weight of this revelation settled over them. The young man stared at his hands, processing. The billionaire watched him, seeing his own features reflected back, not just in his son, but in his nephew. His family. Junior stirred, blinking sleepily. What's going on? The billionaire took his small hand. We just found out our family is bigger than we thought, buddy. Junior's eyes lit up. We have more family? He looked at his brother. Does this mean you have to stay now? The young man froze. He hadn't mentioned leaving. Hadn't even decided yet. But the hopeful look in Junior's eyes shattered any hesitation. Yeah, kid, he said softly. I'm staying. 1 month later, the penthouse felt different. Laughter echoed where there had once been only quiet. The expensive furniture was now dotted with Lego creations and comic books. And in the living room, 3 generations sat together for the first time. The billionaire's father, a stern man in his 70s, studied his newly discovered grandson with wary eyes. You look like my brother, he said finally. The young man shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. I wouldn't know. The older man's face softened. He was a good man. Stubborn, but good. He glanced at the billionaire. Like this one. Junior, curled up beside his brother, piped up. Does this mean I get another grandpa? The room went still. Then, to everyone's surprise, the old man chuckled. I suppose it does. That night, as the city lights twinkled outside, the billionaire stood on the balcony with his oldest son, his nephew, yet somehow both. You don't have to stay here, the billionaire said quietly. I can get you your own place. I know, the young man interrupted. But the kid, he needs us both right now. He hesitated. And maybe I do too. The billionaire nodded, not trusting his voice. Inside, Junior's laughter rang out as he showed his grandfather a magic trick. The sound was sweeter than any fortune. The billionaire had spent his life building an empire. But tonight, for the first time, he understood what real wealth was. It wasn't in skyscrapers or bank accounts. It was in second chances. It was in family.